He should not have asked me that question, but once the words left his mouth, there was no pretending I did not hear them. "Ryan," Sophie's mother said quietly across the kitchen table at midnight, her hands wrapped around a mug she was not drinking from. "If you walk out that door tonight, I don't know if my daughter will survive this year." The sentence sat between us like something fragile and dangerous. I stared at her, not sure if I had misunderstood. Survive? I'd only come here to drop a coworker off. That was it. One simple ride home after a company party. But the look in Ellen Turner's eyes told me this night had nothing to do with a party. Nothing to do with alcohol. And definitely nothing simple. From the living room, I could hear Sophie breathing slowly under a blanket on the couch, completely unaware of the conversation happening 10 feet away. Ellen leaned forward slightly. "I know you barely know her," she said softly, "but tonight she came home with someone who didn't ignore her." Her voice broke for just a second. "So before you go," she whispered, "I need to ask you something." She paused. "Are you the kind of man who stays, or the kind who disappears when things get hard?" I did not answer right away, because the truth was, 2 hours earlier, I had been planning to disappear. My name is Ryan Carter. I am 27 years old. And until tonight, my life was quiet in a way that made it easy not to get involved in anyone else's problems. I worked as a sales representative at a mid-sized tech company in Seattle. My days were numbers, emails, meetings that could have been messages, and coffee that was never strong enough. I lived alone in a small apartment in Capitol Hill with white walls and furniture I bought because it was cheap, not because it meant anything. My life ran on routines: work, gym, microwave dinner, sleep, repeat. It was safe, predictable, lonely sometimes, but manageable. And that was exactly how I liked it. Which is why I almost walked out of that Christmas party without ever speaking to Sophie Turner. The party had been loud, in the way office parties always are. Fake excitement. People drinking faster than they should because it was the one night a year the company pretended everyone was friends. The bar downtown had exposed brick walls and strings of snowflake lights hanging across the ceiling. Holiday music was mixed into dance beats that made everyone talk louder than necessary. I stayed near the edge of the room with one beer. That is usually where I am. Not the center, not the guy telling stories, just the observer. Around 10 o'clock, I grabbed my jacket and started toward the exit. That was when I saw her. Sophie was sitting alone at the bar. Her head rested on her folded arms. Her dark hair spilled across the counter like she had simply run out of energy halfway through the night. 3 empty glasses sat beside her. At first, I assumed she had just overdone it like everyone else. But something about the way her shoulders slumped made me slow down. It looked less like someone drunk, more like someone carrying something heavy. Sophie and I were not close. We worked in the same building, sometimes passed each other by the coffee machine, exchanged small jokes in meetings. She once fixed my laptop when it froze during a presentation. That was the extent of our relationship. Still, I stopped, because I knew what it felt like to sit somewhere hoping someone would notice you were not okay. "Hey, Sophie," I said quietly, touching her shoulder. She lifted her head slowly. Her mascara had smudged beneath her eyes. For a moment, she looked confused. Then, she recognized me. "Ryan," she said softly, like she was surprised I existed. "You okay?" She tried to sit up straighter. "Yeah," she murmured. "Just tired." She pushed herself off the stool. Her knees buckled immediately. I caught her arm before she hit the floor. "Oh, okay," I said gently. "Maybe not just tired." She gave a weak laugh that broke halfway through. "I'll call an Uber." She pulled out her phone. It slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She stared at it for a second. Then something inside her cracked. Her shoulders began shaking. Not loud crying, the quiet kind. The kind people try to hide. She covered her mouth like she was embarrassed by the sound. That was the moment I knew I could not leave. "Come on," I said softly. "I'll drive you home." "You don't have to," she whispered. "It's not a big deal." Outside, the Seattle air hit us with sharp December cold. Snow drifted slowly through the streetlights. Sophie leaned on me as we walked to my old Honda Civic. She kept repeating the same word, sorry, over and over. You don't need to apologize, I told her. She buckled into the passenger seat while I turned the heater on. Soft jazz music played quietly through the speakers as we pulled away from downtown. For the first few minutes, she just stared out the window. Then, her voice cracked. Why does everything feel impossible lately? I did not try to fix it. Sometimes people do not need answers. They need space to break. At a red light, she started crying harder. Her whole body shook. I reached over and squeezed her arm gently. I'm here, I said. She nodded, but did not speak again for the rest of the drive. 20 minutes later, we turned onto Maple Street in West Seattle. Her house sat at the end of the block. Warm yellow light glowed through the windows. It looked peaceful, safe, the kind of place that should not hold so much sadness. I helped Sophie up the walkway. She dropped her keys twice trying to unlock the door. Finally, I rang the bell. A few seconds later, the door opened. A woman in her early 50s stood there. Silver streaks ran through her dark hair. Her eyes were full of worry. When she saw Sophie leaning against me, her face changed instantly. "Oh, honey," she whispered, pulling her daughter into her arms. Then she looked at me. "You brought her home?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. Her expression softened with relief. "Please come inside." The warmth of the house wrapped around me immediately. Cinnamon and something sweet filled the air. A Christmas tree glowed quietly in the corner of the living room. Sophie sank onto the couch while her mom draped a blanket over her shoulders. Within minutes, she was asleep, completely exhausted. I started backing toward the door, but Sophie's mother gently touched my arm. "Would you like to stay over for a minute?" she asked. That was how I ended up sitting across from Ellen Turner at the kitchen table, and that was when she told me the truth. 2 months ago, Sophie's father collapsed on this very porch. A heart attack. No warning. No time. Sophie had been the one to find him. She tried CPR. She called the ambulance. She did everything she could. But he died before help arrived. Since then, Sophie had been pretending she was fine. Working late. Drinking more. Smiling at people who did not know she was drowning. And tonight was the first time someone had brought her home instead of letting her disappear into the night. Which brought us back to the question sitting between Ellen and me, are you the kind of man who stays, or the kind who disappears? I looked toward the living room where Sophie slept under the blanket. Then back at Ellen. The honest answer scared me, because I had spent most of my life avoiding complicated things, avoiding emotional storms that did not belong to me. But something about Sophie's quiet tears in my car kept replaying in my head, and I realized something uncomfortable. Walking away now would be easy, but it would also feel wrong. So I took a slow breath. I don't know what I'm supposed to be, I admitted, but tonight... I glanced again toward the couch. Tonight, I'm not leaving her alone. Ellen's shoulders relaxed slightly, like she had been holding that breath for weeks. But what neither of us knew yet was that staying would change far more than just Sophie's life. Because the next morning, when I walked into work expecting everything to go back to normal, Sophie Turner's desk was empty, and no one in the office knew where she was. Sophie's desk stayed empty the entire morning. At first, no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they noticed and just did not want to say anything. That happens a lot in offices. People see things. They just pretend they do not. I sat at my desk pretending to read through a sales report while my eyes kept drifting to the empty chair across the aisle. Her monitor was dark. Her coffee mug was gone. Even the small cactus she kept near the keyboard had disappeared, like someone had erased her. Around 10, 2 coworkers started joking near the printer about the Christmas party. Someone had taken blurry photos of people dancing. Someone else bragged about drinking too much whiskey. They laughed. No one mentioned Sophie. The memory of her crying in my passenger seat came back so clearly that my chest tightened. By 11, I gave up pretending to work. I opened my email, typed a message, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Everything sounded wrong. Too concerned. Too personal. Finally, I wrote the simplest thing I could think of. "Hey, Sophie. Just checking in. Hope you're okay after last night." No pressure to reply. I stared at the message for a full minute. Then, I hit send. For the next 2 hours, my phone stayed silent. At one point, I even convinced myself she had already decided I had crossed a line by getting involved. Maybe she regretted letting me see her like that. Maybe she wished I had just left her at the bar. Grief makes people push others away. I knew that much. At 2:30, my phone buzzed. I picked it up too fast. A message. Just 3 words. "Thanks for last night." That was it. Short. Simple. But enough to make the knot in my stomach loosen slightly. She was okay. At least okay enough to text. Still, the rest of the workday felt strange. Like something had shifted in the background of my life. When 5 o'clock finally came, I packed up my bag and walked out of the building into the cold Seattle air. Snow still covered the sidewalks from the night before. I stood there for a moment thinking about Maple Street, about Ellen's tired eyes, about the question she had asked me. "Are you the kind of man who stays?" I had not realized it at the time, but answering that question had already started changing something inside me. That night, I kept expecting my phone to buzz again. It did not. Morning came. I went back to work, and when I stepped into the office, Sophie was there, sitting at her desk like nothing had happened. Her hair was tied back neatly. Fresh makeup, a soft gray sweater. To anyone else, she looked completely normal, but I could see the difference. The shadows under her eyes were still there, quiet, heavy. She glanced up as I walked past. For a second, our eyes met. Neither of us said anything, but the look she gave me was different from the casual hallway smiles we used to exchange. This one carried memory. Awareness. Like we both knew we were now connected by something we could not explain to anyone else. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. 5 minutes later, I heard soft footsteps beside my cubicle. "Ryan!" I looked up. Sophie stood there holding a pen between her fingers like she needed something to do with her hands. "Hey," I said. "Can we talk for a minute?" Of course. We stepped into a small meeting room with glass walls and a round table in the middle. She closed the door gently. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Sophie clicked the pen open and closed, over and over. "I remember parts of last night," she said quietly. Her voice carried embarrassment. "And some parts one don't." "You don't have to apologize," I replied. "I'm not apologizing," she said quickly. She took a breath. "I just wanted to say thank you." The words were simple, but they sounded honest. "My mom told me you stayed for coffee," she continued. I nodded. She was worried. "I know." Sophie's mouth curved into a small smile. "She told me." There was a pause. Then, she said something that caught me off guard. "She also said you didn't treat me like I was broken." I blinked. "You're not broken." Her eyes softened when I said that. "Still," she said, "most people would have walked past me at that bar." I shrugged. "I guess I'm not most people." She studied me for a moment, like she was trying to decide something important. "My mom wants you to come over for dinner tonight." That surprised me. "Dinner?" "She insists," Sophie said. "And I would like that, too." The room went quiet again. It felt fast, like stepping back into something that had barely settled. But I also remembered the look on Ellen's face the night before, how much that small conversation had meant to her. "What time?" I asked. Sophie's shoulders relaxed slightly. 7. Quote, "I'll be there." She nodded. Then something softer appeared in her expression. "Ryan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for not pretending nothing happened." She turned and left the room before I could think of a response. The rest of the day passed slowly. Around 6:30, I stopped at a small grocery store near Maple Street. I bought a modest bottle of red wine and a bundle of winter flowers. Nothing fancy, just something respectful. When I pulled up to the house, the porch light was already on. Warm yellow light spilled through the windows again. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Ellen stood there smiling in a way that looked more rested than the night before. "Ryan," she said warmly, "I'm glad you came." The smell of roasted garlic drifted through the hallway. Inside, Sophie stood at the stove wearing an apron. She looked slightly embarrassed. "Dinner's almost ready," she said. "You didn't have to cook," I replied. "I wanted to." We sat at the small dining table together. Salmon, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. At first the conversation stayed light. Work stories. Seattle traffic. A neighbor who apparently had far too many Christmas lights on his roof. For the first time since I had met her, Sophie laughed. A real laugh, not forced. It filled the kitchen in a way that made Ellen smile quietly from across the table. Then the conversation slowed. Sophie set her fork down. Her fingers rested against the edge of the plate. "Mom and I talked this morning," she said softly. The room shifted. Careful, not tense, just real. "About Dad," she added. Ellen reached for her hand. Sophie squeezed it gently. "I keep replaying that night," Sophie admitted. The porch, the ambulance, the silence afterward. Her voice shook slightly. I feel like my life stopped right there, but my body kept moving. No one rushed to fill the silence. I had learned something important the night before. Sometimes listening matters more than speaking. After dinner, Sophie glanced toward the back door. "Do you want to step outside for a minute?" The porch air was cold but clear. Snowflakes drifted slowly through the porch light. We sat side by side on the wooden steps. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Sophie took a slow breath. "I've been drowning for months," she said. "I go to work. I smile. I answer emails." She shook her head slightly. "But inside, it feels like I'm still standing on that porch." I nodded quietly. "You don't have to hide that from me." She looked at me carefully. "Why?" The question surprised me. "Why? What?" "Why did you stay?" Quote. Her eyes searched my face. "You barely know me." I thought about that. Then I answered honestly. "Because leaving would have felt wrong." Sophie looked down at the snow gathering on the porch railing. Then slowly she leaned closer. Just enough that her shoulder touched mine. It was a small thing, but it felt important. Behind us, the door opened quietly. Ellen stepped outside holding 3 mugs of tea. She paused when she saw us sitting there. For a moment, she simply watched. Then her expression softened. She handed us the mugs, said nothing, and went back inside. Sophie wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Steam rose into the cold air. "Ryan," she said quietly, "I'm trying to figure out how to keep living." I did not give her advice. I just said the only thing that felt true. "You don't have to figure it out alone." She looked at me again. This time there was something new in her eyes. Not just gratitude, not just relief, something quieter. Something beginning. But neither of us realized yet how complicated that beginning would become. Because 3 days later, Sophie would ask me a question that would make me consider walking away from all of it. 3 days after that dinner on Maple Street, Sophie asked me a question that made my stomach drop. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing dramatic, no warning. Just a quiet moment in the office kitchen while the coffee machine hummed between us. "Ryan," she said, staring into her cup like the answer might be floating there. "Can I ask you something honest?" I leaned against the counter. "Sure." She hesitated. That was new. Sophie had started speaking more openly over the past few weeks, especially since joining the grief support group she told me about during dinner. But now her shoulders looked tight again. Careful. "Are you helping me because you care about me?" she asked softly. "Or because you feel sorry for me?" The question hit harder than I expected. Not because I did not know the answer, but because I realized she had probably been carrying that doubt for days, maybe weeks. I set my coffee down. "Sophie," I said slowly, "if I felt sorry for you, I would have kept my distance." Her eyes lifted to meet mine. "Pity keeps people polite," I continued. "It doesn't make them stay." For a moment she just watched me. Then her shoulders dropped slightly, like something heavy had loosened. "Okay," she said quietly. Then she gave a small smile. I just needed to hear that. The conversation could have ended there, but it didn't. because a few seconds later she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the counter toward me. "What's that?" I asked. "Something I've been avoiding." I unfolded it. It was a flyer for a grief support group downtown, weekly meetings, simple chairs in a circle, a place where strangers sat together and talked about the people they had lost. "You're thinking about going?" I asked. "I already filled out the form 3 times, she admitted. "Then I throw it away each time." "Why?" "Because talking about it makes it real." Her voice was calm, but her fingers were gripping the edge of the counter tightly. "My mom left that pamphlet on the kitchen table weeks ago," she said. "She never pushed. She just left it there." I nodded. "And now?" She took a slow breath. "Now I'm tired of pretending I'm okay." The words hung in the air between us. Brave, terrifying, real. "If you want someone to go with you the first time," I said carefully, "I can." She blinked. "You would?" Quote, "Of course." Her lips pressed together like she was fighting tears. "Okay," she whispered. "Then I'll go." That night, she texted me from the parking lot outside the building. "I'm here." A minute later, another message appeared. "My hands are shaking." I typed back, "1 step at a time. You don't have to be perfect." 3 dots appeared on the screen, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, her message came. "I'm going in." I sat on my couch staring at my phone for nearly an hour. When it buzzed again, I picked it up instantly. I stayed the whole time. Another message followed. I didn't talk much, but it helped. Reading that made something warm settle in my chest. Not pride, something quieter than that. Relief. Over the next few weeks, the changes in Sophie were small, but they were real. She still had quiet mornings. Sometimes certain songs in the office would make her pause mid-sentence. But she laughed more. She stayed for lunch instead of eating alone. She joined conversations instead of avoiding them. And slowly our lives started overlapping more. Coffee after work, walks during lunch breaks, weekend visits to Maple Street, where I helped Ellen fix small things around the house. A loose step on the porch, a leaking faucet. Nothing big, just things Sophie's dad used to take care of. One Saturday afternoon, I was tightening a screw on the porch railing when Sophie came outside holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to me and sat beside me on the steps. "You know something?" she said casually. "What?" "My dad would have liked you." I paused. "That's a lot of pressure." She smiled. "He liked steady people." "Steady?" "People who show up." The way she said it made my chest tighten slightly. I did not know what to say to that. So I just took another sip of coffee. A week later, Sophie surprised me again. "Do you want to go fishing?" she asked suddenly one evening. "Fishing?" "Lake Washington." Her voice softened. "My dad used to take me there." I understood immediately. This was not just a fishing trip. It was something bigger. A memory she was ready to face again. "I'll go," I said. The morning of the trip was clear and cold. Early spring sunlight shimmered across the lake. Ellen packed us sandwiches and fruit in a small cooler, like she had done 100 times before. Sophie drove. When we reached the dock, she moved with quiet confidence, setting up the fishing rods like it was muscle memory. "You've done this before," I said. "Since I was 6. We pushed the small boat away from the dock. The water was calm. The city skyline shimmered in the distance. For a long time, we sat in silence. Not awkward silence, full silence. The kind that only happens when 2 people trust each other enough not to fill every second with words. Then Sophie's line jerked suddenly. She gasped and started reeling it in. A small trout flashed silver in the sunlight. She laughed. A real laugh that echoed across the water. I had never seen her smile like that. She gently released the fish back into the lake. Then she leaned back against the seat. "This place used to hurt," she admitted quietly. "After my dad died, I drove past here once and had to pull over because I couldn't breathe." "And today?" I asked. She looked across the water. "Peaceful. Today feels different." We ate lunch on the boat, shared stories, laughed about how terrible I was at casting a fishing line. For the first time since I met her, Sophie looked like someone who was not drowning anymore, just someone learning to swim again. On the drive back, she turned down the radio. "You gave me space to breathe," she said softly. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." She looked at me carefully. "Most people don't stay." "I'm not most people," I replied. The words slipped out before I could think about them. When we reached Maple Street, Ellen came outside to greet us. Sophie hugged her tightly. "It was good," she told her mom. Ellen looked relieved. That night, my phone buzzed again. A message from Sophie. "Can you come over for a bit?" When I arrived, she was sitting on the couch under a blanket. The TV played quietly in the background. Ellen smiled when she saw me. "I'm heading to bed," she said gently. The hallway light clicked off. Sophie patted the couch beside her. I sat down, leaving a small space between us like I always did. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned toward me. "I used to think love fixed everything," she said, "but you didn't try to fix me." I stayed quiet. "You just stayed." Her voice softened. "And that changed something." She shifted slightly closer. Our knees touched. My heart started beating faster. "Ryan," she whispered, "I don't just feel grateful anymore." I knew what she was about to say. Before she finished the sentence, "I feel safe with you." Those words hit deeper than anything else. Slowly she reached for my hand. Not sudden, not rushed, just gentle, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't. Her fingers were warm, her grip soft but certain. For a long moment we just sat there breathing. Then I leaned closer. The kiss was careful, quiet, like asking a question. She kissed me back. When we pulled apart, her forehead rested lightly against mine. "I didn't expect you," she whispered. "I didn't expect you either," I admitted. And for a moment, everything felt simple. Until the hallway floor creaked behind us. We both looked up. Ellen was standing there watching, and the expression on her face told me something had just changed forever. Ellen stood in the hallway for a few seconds without speaking. The light behind her cast a long shadow across the living room floor. Sophie's hand was still in mine. Neither of us pulled away. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure they could both hear it. Finally, Ellen stepped forward. Not angry, not shocked, just careful. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. Sophie sat up straighter. "Yes, Mom." Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't let go of my hand. Ellen's eyes moved from Sophie to me. She wasn't judging. She was studying, trying to understand something. I cleared my throat. "I'm sorry if this feels sudden," I said. "It's not sudden," Sophie said quickly. She looked at her mother. "It's honest." Ellen sat down in the chair across from us. Her expression softened. "That's what I wanted for you," she said quietly. "Honesty." Sophie's fingers tightened around mine. "I'm not broken," Sophie whispered. Ellen shook her head immediately. "You were hurting," she said. "That's different." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like the kind of silence people share when something important has just been spoken out loud. Ellen looked at me again. "Ryan," she said gently. "Yes?" "When I asked you to stay that first night, I wasn't just thanking you. I remembered that moment clearly, the warm kitchen, the mug in her shaking hands." "What were you doing?" Sophie asked her. Ellen hesitated. "I was hoping," she admitted. "Hoping for what?" "Hoping you wouldn't disappear." Sophie blinked. "Disappear?" Ellen nodded slowly. "I've watched people drift away from grief," she explained. "Friends stop calling. Coworkers avoid the subject. Everyone assumes someone else will step in." Her eyes filled with tears. "But you came back." She looked at me again. "And that mattered." Sophie wiped at her cheek quietly. "I don't want secrets anymore," she said. "I wasn't okay for a long time." Ellen's hand flew to her mouth. "But I'm trying now," Sophie continued. "I'm going to the support group. I'm talking instead of pretending." Then she glanced at me, and Ryan helped me. I shook my head gently. "I didn't help." "You stayed," Sophie said. "That helped." Ellen exhaled slowly, then she nodded. "Then stay." It wasn't dramatic, no speeches, just permission. And somehow, that simple word felt bigger than anything else. Stay. The months that followed were not perfect. Grief doesn't disappear just because love begins to grow. Sophie still had hard mornings. Sometimes a smell or a song would stop her mid-sentence. Sometimes she would wake up from a nightmare and call me just to hear another voice. And every time she called, I answered. Not because I was trying to save her, but because I had already chosen to stay. Sophie kept going to the support group every week. Not because she was weak, because she was brave enough to face the pain instead of hiding from it. Ellen started seeing a counselor too. Slowly, the house on Maple Street began to feel lighter. Not because Mark was forgotten, but because remembering him didn't hurt the same way anymore. Sophie and I took things slowly. No rushing, no pretending the past didn't exist. Just simple moments. Coffee near the waterfront. Walks through Pike Place Market where the air smelled like fresh bread and roasted coffee. Movie nights at my apartment where Sophie stole my blanket and insisted it belonged to her. Sometimes she would fall asleep with her head on my chest. I would lie there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how close I had come to walking out of that bar the night we met. One small decision. That was all it took to change everything. About 9 months later, something unexpected happened. I got offered a job. A good one. A promotion with a different tech company. Better pay, better benefits. The problem was, it was in Portland. 3 hours away. I stared at the email for a long time. Career-wise, it made perfect sense. Emotionally, it complicated everything. That night I drove to Maple Street. Sophie was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea when I walked in. Ellen had already gone to bed. "You look serious," Sophie said. "I might be," I replied. I sat down across from her. "There's something I need to tell you." Her expression grew cautious. "Okay. I got a job offer today." Quote. Her eyes widened slightly. "That's amazing." "It's in Portland." The room went quiet. Sophie didn't react right away. She just stared at the table. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You should take it." Her voice sounded calm. Too calm. "You didn't even ask how I feel about it," I said. She shrugged. "It's your life." Something about the way she said it didn't feel right. "Look at me," I said gently. She lifted her eyes, and I saw it immediately. Fear. The same quiet fear I had seen the night I brought her home from the bar. "You think I'm leaving you," I said. She shook her head quickly. "No." But the words sounded hollow. "Sophie." She swallowed. "I just don't want to be the reason you stay somewhere you shouldn't." My chest tightened. "You're not a reason," I said. "You're a choice." Her eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't have to choose." I already did. The words came out before I could stop them. She blinked. "When?" "The night your mom asked me if I was the kind of man who disappears." The room fell silent. Sophie stared at me. "You turned down the job?" Quote. I nodded. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Why?" I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The car ride, the porch, the lake, the night she called just to hear another voice. Then I told her the truth. "Because some opportunities build a career," I said quietly. "And some build a life." Her tears finally spilled over. She stood up quickly and walked around the table. Then she wrapped her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I love you," she whispered. The words settled into the room like warmth. I held her just as tightly. "I love you too." But neither of us realized yet that the most important moment of our story was still waiting for us on that same porch where everything had started. The porch light on Maple Street had a soft yellow glow. I had noticed it the first night I ever stood there. Snow falling quietly, Sophie leaning against me, Ellen watching from the doorway with worried eyes. At the time, it felt like a moment. Now it felt like the beginning of something much bigger. Nearly a year had passed since that night, and somehow the porch had become a place where important things happened. Which is why it did not surprise me when Sophie asked me to step outside with her again. It was a cool evening in early winter. The air carried that quiet stillness Seattle gets right before the holidays. Inside the house, Ellen was finishing dishes in the kitchen. Soft music played from a radio somewhere down the hall. Sophie opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. I followed. For a moment we just stood there. The street was calm. Snow had not fallen yet, but the air felt like it might. "You know," Sophie said softly, leaning against the railing, "I used to hate this porch." I looked at her. "I know." She smiled faintly. "After my dad died, I avoided it for months." Her fingers traced along the wood of the railing. "I thought if I stepped out here again, it would feel like that night all over." I remembered what Ellen had told me, how Sophie had found her father collapsed right here, how she had tried to save him. "You faced it anyway," I said. Sophie nodded. "Because of you." I shook my head. "You faced it because you're strong." She looked at me carefully. "You helped me remember that." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet was comfortable, familiar. Then Sophie reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out something small, metal, worn smooth with time. "What's that?" I asked. She placed it in my hand. It was a watch, old-fashioned. The leather strap faded from years of use. "My dad's fishing watch," she said. I turned it over carefully. The glass was scratched, but the hands still moved steadily. "He wore it every time we went to Lake Washington," she continued. "Even when it stopped working once, he refused to replace it." I smiled slightly. "That sounds stubborn." "Very." She took a slow breath. "I've been holding on to it all year." Her voice softened. "But tonight I realized something." "What?" She looked at the porch railing. "This watch kept time for my dad's life." Then she looked back at me. "And you gave me mine back." The words caught me off guard. "Sophie." She shook her head gently. "Let me finish." I stayed quiet. "I spent months thinking my life ended the night my dad died," she said. "I thought everything after that would just be surviving." Her eyes glistened under the porch light. "But then one random night, a coworker I barely knew decided to drive me home instead of walking away." Her voice trembled slightly. "And that changed everything." I did not know what to say, because hearing your own actions described like that makes them feel bigger than they ever felt in the moment. "You didn't rescue me," she continued. "You didn't fix me." Her hand slid into mine. "You stayed." The word echoed softly between us. Stay. The same word Ellen had spoken months earlier. Then Sophie did something that surprised me. She gently closed my fingers around the watch. "I want you to keep it." I blinked. "What?" "It reminds me of something important." "What's that?" She stepped closer. "That time keeps moving." Her voice grew softer. "And the people who stay with you while it moves, those are the ones who matter." My throat tightened. "Sophie, this belonged to your dad." "I know." Quote. "Are you sure?" Quote. She nodded. "My dad trusted people who showed up." A small smile touched her lips. "And you've shown up every single time." The weight of the watch in my hand suddenly felt heavier, not because of the metal, because of what it meant. "I don't know if I deserve this," I said quietly. She laughed softly. "You do." The front door creaked open behind us. Ellen stepped onto the porch, holding 3 mugs of tea. She paused when she saw the watch in my hand. Her eyes widened slightly. "Is that Mark's watch?" she asked. Sophie nodded. "I gave it to Ryan." Ellen studied my face for a moment. Then she smiled gently. "That man never trusted easily," she said. "But if he were here," she looked at Sophie, "I think he would approve." Sophie leaned her head lightly against my shoulder. The porch light flickered softly above us. For a moment, the 3 of us stood there quietly. Then Ellen handed us the mugs of tea. "Careful," she said. "It's hot." The warmth spread through my hands. Sophie glanced at the watch again. "You know what the funny thing is?" she said. "What?" "The first thing my mom ever said to you." I smiled. "Would you like to stay over?" She nodded. "You did." Her voice was soft. "But tonight I want to ask you something different." I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" She took a breath, not nervous, just serious. "Ryan Carter." Her fingers tightened around mine. "Will you stay for the rest of it?" Quote. My heart skipped. "The rest of what?" She smiled gently. "The rest of my life." The words hung in the cold air between us, not rushed, Not dramatic, just honest. For a second, the world felt completely still. Then I looked at Sophie, at Ellen watching quietly behind us, at the watch resting in my hand. And I realized something. This story had never been about saving someone. It had always been about choosing someone. Every single day. So I answered the only way that felt true. Yes. Sophie let out a quiet breath that sounded like relief and happiness at the same time. Then she kissed me softly under the porch light. And for the first time since the night her father died, that porch no longer felt like the place where her life ended. It felt like the place where it began again. But the most important words of our story had not been spoken yet. The night Sophie asked me to stay for the rest of her life, the porch on Maple Street felt different. Not brighter, not louder, just peaceful in a way I had never noticed before. For months that porch had carried the weight of something terrible. A memory that sat in the wood of the railing and the quiet space between the steps and the street. But that night, the air felt lighter. Sophie stood beside me, her hand still wrapped around mine. The old fishing watch rested in my palm. Ellen watched us quietly from the doorway, a mug of tea warming her hands. None of us rushed the moment, because some moments deserve silence. Eventually, Sophie laughed softly and wiped her eyes. "Okay," she said, looking at me. Now I'm embarrassed. "Why?" I asked. "Because I just proposed to you on a porch." I smiled. "You didn't propose." Her eyebrow lifted. "You asked me to stay." She thought about that for a second. "Fair." Ellen chuckled behind us. "Well," she said warmly, "that's the most honest proposal I've ever heard." The three of us stood there for another minute before the cold air finally pushed us back inside. The house smelled like cinnamon again. It had become a familiar scent over the past year, like the house itself had learned how to breathe again. Sophie curled up beside me on the couch while Ellen disappeared into the kitchen to rinse the mugs. For a while we just sat there quietly. Her head rested against my shoulder, the same way it had many nights before. But tonight something felt different, not uncertain, settled. "You know something strange," Sophie said softly. "What?" "If you hadn't stopped at that bar that night." Her voice trailed off. I finished the thought. We would have just stayed co-workers. Or strangers. She nodded, and I might still be pretending I was okay. I thought back to that moment again. Standing near the door. Almost leaving. Almost walking past her. It had been such a small decision. 10 seconds. Maybe less. "Funny how life works like that," I said quietly. She lifted her head and looked at me. "Ryan?" "Yeah?" "Do you ever regret staying?" The question caught me off guard. Why would I regret it? Quote. She shrugged slightly. "Because it pulled you into a mess." I laughed softly. "It didn't pull me." "What do you mean?" I walked into it. Sophie studied my face. "You chose it." Every time. Her eyes softened in that way they did when something inside her finally felt safe. "You're not tired of choosing it?" Quote. "No." "Not even on the hard days?" "Especially on the hard days." She rested her head back on my shoulder. Neither of us spoke again for a while. From the kitchen we could hear Ellen humming quietly while she dried dishes. The sound felt warm, comfortable, like the kind of home people search for their whole lives. About an hour later, Ellen walked back into the living room and leaned against the doorframe. "I was thinking," she said. Sophie looked up. "That can be dangerous." Ellen laughed. "Next month will be 1 year since your dad passed." The room grew quiet, but it wasn't the painful silence it used to be, just respectful. "I want us to do something that day," Ellen continued. "Something together." Sophie nodded slowly. I was thinking the same thing. She turned to me. "Will you come with us?" Of course. The day arrived sooner than any of us expected. The sky was clear. Cold winter air drifting through the quiet streets of Seattle. Ellen stood on the porch holding a small candle. Sophie stood beside her. I stayed a step behind them. The same porch where everything had changed. Ellen lit the candle first. "For Mark," she said softly. She placed it on the railing. The flame flickered gently in the wind. Sophie stepped forward next. "I used to think this porch was where my life ended," she said quietly. Her voice was calm now, stronger. "But now I know something different." She turned toward me. "This is where my life started again." My chest tightened, because hearing those words meant more than she probably realized. She stepped closer and slipped her hand into mine. "Ryan," she said softly, "I love you." The words carried no fear this time, no hesitation, just truth. "I love you too," I answered. Behind us, Ellen wiped her eyes quietly, but she was smiling. Later that evening, Sophie and I sat together on the couch again. The candle still flickered on the porch outside the window. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she said. "What?" "The first thing my mom ever said to you." I smiled. "I remember." She looked at me. "Would you like to stay over?" I nodded. That question changed everything. Sophie squeezed my hand. "You said yes." "Best decision I ever made." She leaned against me. "And the best part?" "What?" "You never really left." Quote. I looked around the room, at the warmth of the house, at the quiet peace that had slowly replaced the grief. Then, I thought about the night I almost walked out of that bar without ever speaking to her. One small choice, one moment. That was all it took. Sometimes love does not arrive in perfect timing. Sometimes it begins on a messy night with a tired woman at a bar, a worried mother at her front door, and a simple question asked at midnight. "Would you like to stay over?" Most people think love is about finding someone who makes life easier. But the truth is simpler than that. Love is about the person who stays when life becomes hard. And some promises do not need a ceremony. They are spoken quietly, kept daily, and they last a lifetime. I stayed, and that changed everything.